I'm Bob, an alcoholic. So, fears are very simple. The book says we reviewed our fears thoroughly. We put them on paper, even though we had no resentment in connection with them. So, one of the things that so many of us have a hard time identifying fear, because a lot of us developed an old idea that if you're afraid, you're weak. If you're afraid, people are going to take advantage of you. And so we hide fear, and some of us develop a knee-jerk, instantaneous reaction to fear that's anger. So we never experience the fear. The moment, the instant I'm threatened, I just rage, I get angry, I attack, and I go through my whole life and I never see how afraid I really am. But it's really fear. So when it says we're driven by 100 forms of fear, I tell the guys I sponsor, I want you to put down all your secrets. All the things that you're afraid people might find out about. I want you to put down everybody you've hurt that nobody knows you're the one that stole the money. Nobody knows. The people where you're afraid of disclosure. Or maybe you did something horrible in life and you're just afraid of some kind of karmatic consequences. You have an apprehension about it. The guilt's a form of fear. Shame's a form of fear. Your secrets all have fear involved with them. So you put it all down on paper. All the people you'd harmed, that you never made right, and you're afraid of retribution or being found out. All your secrets. All the things that you've done that created more fear. And then there's a question. After you list all these fears, we ask ourselves why we had the fears. Now remember that inadvertently we're creating an 8-step list. If you look at page 76, on the section on step 8, it says, we have a list, the third line down the middle paragraph, we have a list of all persons we had harmed. We do? Oh yeah. We made it when we took inventory. So from our resentment list will come the names of people that our relationship needs mending. From our fear list, there'll be things in our life and situations that need mending, we need to face, we need to walk through. And because the question, why do we have the fear, will often unlock the amends. Like in the U.S., I run into this frequently. A guy's afraid of doing his taxes. Why? Well, because I've been cheating on my taxes. Oh, okay. I had a guy come up to me one time after a meeting at one of the halfway houses, and he was kind of new, and he was writing his. I sponsored his sponsor, and his sponsor told him to talk to me. And he came up to me and he said, I'm writing my fear inventory. And I said, I don't understand why I have some of the fears I have. And I said, oh, well, can you give me a couple examples? And he reaches in his pocket, he pulls out a cigarette, puts it in his mouth, lights it up, takes a big hit, and he goes, well, one of my fears is I'm afraid of cancer. And I don't know why. I was never traumatized by cancer. My parents didn't have cancer. He takes another hit off the cigarette. I get this weird fear of cancer. And I'm looking at him and I'm like, could it be because you smoke? And he looked at me like, oh, that'd be too simple. He's looking for deep Freudian reasons why he's afraid of cancer. Some people are... I had a guy... He kept drinking. He was so afraid he had AIDS. Matter of fact, he was convinced he had AIDS. And I said to him, you got to go take an AIDS test. Oh, no, I'm not taking an AIDS test. Why not? He said, well, I'll find out I have AIDS. He said, well, you're already suffering as if you do. Why don't you just go find out? And he said, no, I don't. I said, listen, I'll go with you. Wouldn't hurt me. I'll get one too. How about that? He said, well, I don't want to do it. No, come on, you're going to go. So in Vegas, you get the test, and then it takes like 3 days. We had to sit on him for 3 days. He was going crazy. He's sure he has AIDS. He's sure. He's doing deathbed speeches and everything, And he didn't have AIDS. And he suffered and relapsed over and over again because of that fear. Right? So we ask ourselves why we have them. And a lot of times it's things that have to be mended in our lives. Unfinished business, things we have to walk through, things we have to face. And this is where we get to begin to trust God. Because that's what the answer. It says, perhaps there is a better way. We think so, for we are now on a different basis. Remember step 3. The basis of trusting and relying upon God. We trust infinite God rather than our finite selves. Every time I walk through a fear and make an amends and face something I don't want to face, I'm taking an atrophied muscle that has been unused for years, the trust muscle, and I'm exercising it. And like any other muscle, the more you exercise it, the stronger it gets. And the more you trust God, the more trustworthy God becomes. And it's a funny dynamic, because I don't think you can really emotionally trust God because somebody says you should. Because fear is loud within us. It clamors. But every time I'm forced to trust God, I realize more and more how trustworthy he actually is. I'm the kind of guy that I can't do it. I can't trust God because I'm supposed to. I know I should. I ought to. I'd be better off. But when emotion and intellect are in conflict, my emotions seem to always win. What do you do if you know you need to trust God when you're afraid, but you can't? You can't stop worrying. You can't stop the panic. You can't stop it. What do you do? On page 53, Bill talks about alcoholism, when we're not often crushes us. That's what the ego does, is it blows up and it blows up and it blows up, and then it eventually crushes us. The wheels fall off. It turns bad on us. And it says, crushed by a self-imposed crisis, which means I did it. Nobody did this to me. Crushed by a self-imposed crisis I could not postpone or evade, I had to fearlessly face the proposition that either God is everything or else he's nothing. Either is or isn't. What's my choice to be? The first time I got crushed by, I was in this spot, was when I was newly sober and I was facing the 2 years in prison, and just frightened, terrified me. I don't know. Some people aren't that afraid of jail. I don't jail well. I don't. It's not good for me. I still got scars from that I'd gotten in jail and fights with people. And I'm terrified. And my sponsor told me the truth. And the truth was, you have to turn yourself in and offer to go and do the 2 years, or you're not going to stay sober. You can't stay sober looking over your shoulder. Every time you see a police car, you're going to be in a panic, imagining that cop has your picture on his dashboard. And you'll eventually drink again, or do drugs or something, or medication or something. But you'll be forced by your emotions. And I knew what he was saying is right, because I know how fear has done me in before. I knew he was right, and he walked me through the process, and it was the first time in my life I ever did something I really didn't feel like doing. and I really didn't want to do. And I didn't trust that it was going to work, but I didn't know what else to do. I got nowhere to go here. I'm crushed by a self-imposed crisis that I cannot postpone, and I can't duck it or evade it. There's nowhere to go here. There's no wiggle room. I got no plan. I got no game here. I don't know what else to do except what the sponsor's telling me to do, which doesn't seem like a good idea. But I got nothing. And it was the first time I ever trusted my sponsor and inadvertently trusted God, because God's behind the curtain. We don't really trust a surgeon. When you go to have surgery, you're not really trusting the surgeon. Surgeons are fallible. You're trusting the power behind the surgeon. When I trust my sponsor, I'm really trusting the power behind my sponsor. When I'm trusting, I trust is really the ultimate, because there's only one source of trust in the universe, and that's God. That's why it's odd that I feel the closest to God when I'm doing two things. One is when I'm a songwriter, when I'm creating, and when I'm helping people I sponsor. And I think the reason is that there's only one creator and there's only one helper. And when you're helping and creating, you're closer to the source than you've ever been. Because you're not really doing it, you're just a channel. And so we're on a different basis, the basis of trusting and relying upon God. A guy told me a story many years ago. He said, most people try to stay sober on faith, and faith isn't enough. He said, I know alcoholics that have prayed and had tremendous amounts of faith and drank and died. He said, we have to have trust. And I must have looked at him like, well, I don't get it. What's the difference? To me, they seem like the same thing. And he said, there's a big difference between faith and trust. He said, if you went to a circus and you sat in the audience and you watched a tight wire act, and you watched people come out to the edge of the wire with holding bars and different things and were riding unicycles, you'd have all the faith in the world they can cross that wire. And you'd see a man come out to the platform and he's got a wheelbarrow. He'd sit in the audience and think, complete faith, that guy could walk across that tight wire pushing that wheelbarrow. I bet she's done it 1,000 times. Professional. Convinced. I know he can do it. But if you had trust, you'd go and get in the wheelbarrow and let him push you across. And when the guy told me that, I got this horrible sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach, because I know what he means. I just can't imagine being that vulnerable to get in that wheelbarrow and be that helpless in God's hands. To trust that much. Now, I understand it intellectually. And I think it's a good idea to get in the wheelbarrow. And I like reading spiritual literature that talks about getting in the wheelbarrow. I like going to meetings where we discuss getting in the wheelbarrow. I like going out to coffee with people. We talk about the intricacies of getting in the wheelbarrow. I just hate getting in the damn wheelbarrow, you know what I'm saying? Because I am so afraid that if I ever became that vulnerable and that helpless in front of God and trusted him that much, I'd get in that wheelbarrow, I'd get halfway out that wire, and I'd hear that voice. Is that Bob? And my life would flash before my eyes, every bad thing I ever did, because I'm convinced that God is going to dump me. You know why? Because I would. Several of my literary heroes came from Ireland, and one of them was George Bernard Shaw. And Shaw one time said that God created us in his image, and unfortunately we turned around and returned the favor, which means that we start imagining God's like us, is vengeful and vindictive and selfish as we are. And we're not, and God's not. To trust God's a big deal here. Because you'll see, if you're new here, you'll see something that you want, but you don't know how to get. And that is a level of comfort and peace. You'll see old-timers, you'll see some old-timers that look just so right in their life. They just sit so right in their life. Like they know exactly who they are. They know exactly what their life's about. They're not worried about stuff the way I am when I'm new. They're not spinning in their head about stuff. They're not thinking about the future. They almost seem present most of the time. They actually listen to you when you talk to them. They're here. And the reason that they are able to do that is that they have practiced the actions of trust with God over a long period of time. And the more you take those actions, the easier it becomes. And in time, and I can't tell you when, I can't tell you if this will, I've seen it happen for people in just a few years, and I've seen it happen for others where it's taken decades. But in time, practicing, trusting God by your actions, there'll come a time when you will know something. I mean, you will know something in your innermost self. Because you will have had an experience that has proved it over and over and over and over again. That the power behind you was always greater than the obstacles before you. No matter what. No matter what. And the only reason a guy like me gets to know that is I've had to have that experience over and over and over again. I've been forced into the wheelbarrow over and over and over again because lack of power truly is my dilemma. I can't fix myself. And I make stupid mistakes and stupid decisions in sobriety that have the potential to really hurt me and other people. And God redeems me when I can get out of the way. And I'll tell you, he's done for me not only what I couldn't do for myself, what I wouldn't have done for myself because I didn't deserve it. And he did for me. He helped me. And I find that God's very, very trustworthy. And now about sex. Or is it? I went to a young people's conference and they read it, How About Sex? It was, the odd thing about the sexual inventory, and if this might be news to anyone who hasn't done it out of the book, it's not about sex. I mean, if it was, I think Fifth Steps would be more entertaining. But it's not about sex. It's like every other aspect of my life. When it says in our book that selfishness, self-centeredness is the root of our trouble, it's about how selfishness and self-centeredness manifests itself in the sexual arena. That's what it's about. It's not about sex. It's about how I hurt myself and God's kids by the selfish pursuit of not wanting to be alone, the selfish pursuit of gratification, the selfish pursuit of for me, the self-seeking. And so, one of the things that the first direction is we make a list. I listed all my sexual encounters because I want to see what my ego does when the sexual instinct is involved. And sex is a funny area because it's the only area of your life where all three of the basic instincts that Wilson talks about in the 12 Steps and 12 Traditions can be threatened. He talks about the instinct for sex, the instinct for security, both emotional and material, and the instinct for society. In other words, how do you look to people? What do people think of you? That's a driving instinct for some of us, this obsessive concern with how we look. And so in the sexual arena, it's the one area where if you have a long-term relationship and it starts to go south on you, it's the one area where all three of those instincts can be severely threatened. And I don't know about you guys, but the more fear, the crazier I can act and be. I mean, if you have a long-term marriage, I know in where I live, and you're facing a divorce, it's a community property state. You have the potential of losing half. Usually, if you end up with only losing half, you've done well. Losing half or more of everything you own. Half. I had a friend who's married and divorced 5 times in sobriety. Jesus, I thought, he's a glutton for punishment, I'll tell you. He said it was so sad. He said, every time I get divorced, I lose half of everything. He said, over the years, the halves are getting smaller. I thought, oh, geez. That's true. Your emotional security can be threatened. Nobody likes to go through a divorce. It's painful. It's very frightening. And your security, financially, and also your sex and your position in society. I don't know anybody that wants to go to their family and their friends, their home group, anywhere, and have to tell everybody you're getting a divorce. Nobody likes that. So it makes people crazy. And the greater the fear and the greater the angst, the greater the problems. And so I'm going to inventory my sexual conduct over the years with 9 questions. For every sexual encounter, I ask myself the questions in the middle of page 69, which I would like to ask. If there was an Ask It basket for Bill Wilson, I'd say, why is this on page 69? How did you do that? I mean, how could you arrange it like that? I mean, were you trying to do that, or? I don't know. First question in every relationship: where was I selfish? You know, when you read the beginning of chapter 5, and it talks about selfishness and self-centeredness is the root of our troubles, and you kind of see it in a general way, and selfishness, But when you start looking at it, at every relationship in your life, how much of a me-first person I am. That when push comes to shove, it's what I want. When push comes to shove, my feelings come first. I would have never believed I was as selfish as I was, because I could dress it up. There are times I could be very generous, I could be very kind, I could be all that stuff, until I feel threatened, and then I'm me first. Right? Where was I selfish? Where was I dishonest? My dishonesty in relationships from time to time has been delusional. It's like because I'm driven by several forces here. One is this thing about not wanting to be alone. And driven by that, I can start to imagine things. Driven by the need for some kind of excitement, gratification, the need to be with someone, to feel good. I think for some of us, sex can become like it's a replacement for alcohol, right? So driven by these things, I can con myself. I can think, this is my soulmate. How do you know, Bob? I only saw her across the room once. I don't even know anything about her. I'm sure I'm not the only one in this room that especially in my first few years of sobriety, I'd see someone and I'd ask them to go out, and if they said yes, I'd spend the whole next week in the la land. I mean, I knew what college our kids were going to. I mean, I haven't even gone out with her yet. I don't really even know her last name. I just, just fantasy land. And what drives that? It's the vacancies in here that drives it. Where was I inconsiderate? Oh, I still struggle with this to this day. This is the one area. I've gotten pretty good with the others. I've made some considerable progress for sure. But I get so wrapped up in me from time to time that I don't see you. It's an odd dynamic, and it's a common form of inconsideration for people who are overly self-involved. What happens is I get something on my mind, and it's right here. And if you're with me, and I got something on my mind right here, you'll feel like I don't even know you're there, because the truth is I don't. I'm so full. It's not that I don't want to be around you. It's just I'm so focused on me and my stuff and the things I'm worried about. I don't see you. Alcoholics are often misdiagnosed, I believe, with attention deficit. And the implication of attention deficit is that we don't have the ability to pay attention. Teachers often say that kids, they can't pay attention. They have attention deficit. Well, in my case, it's not that I can't pay attention. I pay obsessive attention. It's just not to you, right? You know what I'm saying? You want to see, take someone who's they say has attention deficit and give them something they want to pay attention to. They'll pay attention to it. But they won't pay attention to other things. And I think that's why I appear at times to be inconsiderate. I was Jules sometimes, and we're walking somewhere, and I don't even know I'm doing it. I'm like, all I see, I get these blinders on, I see the destination. And next thing I know, we're going. And it's like, where'd she go? Right? I pulled ahead. I don't even know I'm doing it. I just pull ahead. And it's not that I'm not noticing her, I'm just noticing me so much and my need to get wherever we're going to get this. I get this urgency going on. Women do the same thing. We're so wrapped up in ourselves, we don't see what we see. And I have a sponsee who was married a long time, and he came from a place of horrible irresponsibility, and now he has a big corporate position. And it's a very important position in a big corporation. And as a result, he's tasked for him and his wife to attend dinner parties and various social things. And it's very important for him to be on time. So they have an event to go to, and this happens over and over again, and they have to be there at 7 o'clock. So he tells his wife, we need to leave the house at 6:30, because he likes to be about 5 minutes early anyway. And she's on board. Yeah, well, I'll be ready, don't worry. And comes time to leave, and she grabs her purse, and she's ready to walk out, and she walks by the mirror and goes, the shoes and that doesn't work. And she starts getting ready all over again. And it makes him crazy because they're always late. And she's not doing that on purpose. She didn't set out that morning and think, I know there's a way today to make him nuts. It's not a conscious inconsideration. She's just really concerned with her stuff and how she looks, that she's not even seeing how crazy she's making him by making him late for work, for his work thing. Guys do the same thing. I have one sponsee, his wife gets so mad at him because she started to learn when he's watching sports on television, it's like she doesn't exist, right? She gets so mad at him for that, and eventually she just leaves him alone when he's watching sports, because she just accepts that he's just that way. We get blinders on. We only see what we want to see when we want to see what we want to see. And it's a form of selfishness. Whom had I hurt? Did I unjustifiably arouse jealousy, suspicion, or bitterness? Sometimes people do that as a form of manipulation. You see that a lot of times with new people. They get hooked up early in sobriety in a relationship, and there's a lot of insecurity there, and they don't even realize how insecure they really are. And they'll be out somewhere. I've seen this in my old home group. It caused a lot of problems, almost fights a couple times, where some girl would come to the meeting with her boyfriend, and he gets immediately wrapped up talking to a couple guys he sponsors, newer guys, and she feels left out and she feels unattended, and so she starts sexually flirting with one of his friends in order to bring his attention back to her. And the problem is it works, but it doesn't work in a positive way, and it causes a lot of resentments and a lot of harm and a lot of disunity in an Alcoholics Anonymous group. A lot of hard feelings. And why? Because we're driven. It's a form of manipulation driven by fear. Where are we at fault? And here's I think the perfect question. What should I have done instead? And the reason that to me this is the most important question is that it's not enough to take an honest look at where I screwed up. If I could take a look at where I screwed up and I don't have an idea of how I could have done better, chances are I'm going to repeat the same mistakes over and over again. I've listened to a couple hundred fifth steps, and when you get to the relationships and the sex inventory, it's so much of a pattern. It's the same thing over and over. The faces change, it's the same thing. Because they never learned from their mistakes. Because they never got a vision of how they could have done different, so they do the same thing again. And they never learn. If I'm going to say this prayer that's coming up, where I ask God to mold my ideals and help me to live up to them, in order to have a future sex life, I'm going to build it on what I could have done instead. Because I'll tell you what, I believe this 100%. You're going to get some do-overs. This is a wonderful, wonderful universe, and it provides continual do-overs. You screwed up in your first marriage, you're going to get a do-over. And if you didn't learn what you should have learned from that one, you're going to probably repeat the same thing over again. But maybe you'll have a vision that you can let God take you to something different. Maybe with his help you can be a different guy or a different gal in this do-over than you were before. You know where you see really beautiful do-overs is men and women in Alcoholics Anonymous that will confess in meetings tearfully at times what a terrible parent they were, how they were abusive parents, they were terrible parents, and how much regret they express over that. But they get to be the most amazing grandparents. It's their do-over. They're redeeming themselves with their grandchildren for the mistakes that they can't change in the past from what they did with their kids. And it's wonderful. And inadvertently, they're redeeming themselves with their kids by being the grandparent that their kids love, to be with their kids. So what should I have done instead? Because it's going to come up again. And to break the cycle. And sexual inventories are such patterns of repetition, to say over and over and over. And sometimes they are vacillating patterns. You go from the rejector to the rejectee, to the rejector to the rejectee. I was completely obsessed with her, and she dumped me. So I found someone that was completely obsessed with me, and I dumped them. And then I felt so bad I needed somebody really amazing, and I found someone I was obsessed with, and they dumped me. And I just so hurt I had to go find someone obsessed with me, and then I dumped them. And it's like, stop it. You know, it's like, whoa. We see these patterns that occur. I'm amazed. I heard a woman one time share something. She talked about she ended up marrying this guy who just treated her like crap and abused her, and people would say you need to leave him, and she couldn't imagine leaving him. And she said, I guess I secretly found someone who treated me the way I felt I deserved. You know? I thought, Jesus, it's probably true. Huh? Sad. So, one last thing in sex. When sex is troublesome, we throw ourselves the harder into helping others. We think of their needs and work for them. This takes us out of ourselves. It quiets the imperious urge when to yield would mean heartache. I don't know any solution for something that is as overcoming as going through a divorce other than help people. Throw yourself down. I've been married twice and divorced twice, and I survived, and both of them were very difficult. And I survived both of them by throwing myself the harder into helping others. My first divorce was very painful, and it was just crazy. And God's got a funny sense of humor. He must have thrown 12 to 15 guys my way that were all going through divorces and relationship breakups. It was if you were going, anyone for 100 miles had a broken relationship, they'd come and ask me to help them. I'd pile 5 or 6 of them in my car, and we'd just go from meeting to meeting. We'd be the depressed section of the meeting. I heard a secretary one time say to the chairman, "Don't call on any of them. They'll be talking about relationships." But those guys saved me from myself until I could come back and I could do the work and get free. They bought me islands in my day where I was relieved momentarily from the bondage of self, because I would hear their pain and I would watch them cry their tears, and it would make my position a little less painful. And I'd be a little bit free from it while I'm concerned with them. And it would come back. But in those moments, they sustained me until I could eventually go through the work and change my whole perception of what had happened and make my amends. I'm not going to talk too much about 5. We're going to come back in the morning with one of the steps I think is one of the most important, and yet the most neglected and the most misunderstood. That's 6. All I'll say about 5 is what it says in the book. If you don't do it, you're probably not going to stay sober. It's what it says, the best reason to do it first. If you don't do it, you won't overcome drinking. And a lot of people in AA, I've run into a lot of people that relapsed, and when you get down to it and you start asking them about their 4th and 5th step, how it's not unusual to have them confess that they left something out. My friend Clint used to say there's a world of difference between telling everything in the 5th step and telling everything except one thing. Because if you hold one thing back, it will inevitably be the worst thing you could hold back. The one thing you hold back will be the most important thing that you should share in the 5th step. And why do you hold it back? Because of the fear. What are they going to think? What if they turned me in and I went to prison? I can't say that. I can't tell them that. I think so many of us secretly believe that if you knew everything about me that I knew about me, you'd feel about me the way I feel about me, and that's not good. So I'm afraid to tell you everything about me because I'm afraid that you're going to feel about me the way I feel about me. And yet, nobody gets better unless they risk. My friend Vince used to say that you're never going to feel better until you're willing to look bad. You can't save ass and face at the same time. Pick one. And most of us are here because we're dying, and we have to save our lives. And so there's nothing more important than transparency. When I got sober, there wasn't a lot of big book consciousness, but my sponsor, one of the first things he told me, he says, you're going to have to be transparent. You're going to have to be real with somebody if you're going to live. Back in the years when I was a counselor, there was a tool that we often used in groups, and it was a very interesting thing, and I think it really applies a lot in Alcoholics Anonymous. It was called the Johari window, and it was a standard in treatment in psychotherapy for a number of years, used by a lot of different venues, everything from Gestalt to RET. And the Johari window was a way to look at people. And the Johari window had 4 panes in it. And the first pane was completely transparent. And that pane was consisted of everything I know about me and you know about me, and it's the same. You know about me and I know, everything's transparent. The second pane is things that I know about me that I don't want anybody to know about me. It's like one of those mirrors you can see through one way, but you can't see through the other way. It's blocked. Things I know about me, but I'm keeping it a secret. And we clear that window into transparency in step 4 and 5. The third window is an unusual window. It's the window where the things that you know about me, but I don't know about me. And when you're new, you see a lot of that. The old timers used to startle me, man. Because it seemed like they knew stuff about me. How did they know that? I mean, and you can do that with any new guy. Just go up to them and just say, "You've been worrying about yourself a lot lately, haven't you? How do you know that, right?" Well, I know that. And they would talk about fears and they'd talk about resentments in a way like, how did they know? How do they know I'm feeling that? They know more about me than I do. And they did. They really knew more about me than I did. And then the last window, and that's God's window, that's the things I don't know about me. They're there, but I can't see them. As Chamberlain said, you can only see what you can see when you can see it. I don't know them about me, and neither do you. It's a completely blacked out window both ways. And I think recovery is a process of clearing the panes for transparency. And the last pane has to be cleared by God. The other one pane can be cleared by the steps, another can be cleared by a sponsor who's not afraid to tell you the truth, and the other one we wait. And more, as it says in the book, more will be revealed, will be disclosed. It actually says, everybody quotes it as being revealed, more will be revealed. It actually says more will be disclosed, as if the implication is it's already there, you just closed it off. More will be disclosed. And that is so true. As time goes on, I learn stuff about myself. I know things about myself at 39 and a half years sober that I didn't know at 30 years. They were there. I just wasn't awake to it. And at 30 years sober, I was awake to things that at 10 years sober, I didn't have a clue about. And it's not because I'm consciously trying to not look at it. I just don't see it. And God's been clearing my windows. And in time, we all wake up and we all start to see the light. But it takes time. And it takes some effort. And sometimes sponsees will clear the window for you. If you've ever had the experience of sponsoring someone and they start telling you about something that's real secret to them, that they've been thinking and feeling and doing, and you're listening to it and you're thinking, wait a minute. I've been doing that. I never even considered it a problem until you mentioned it. It's weird. That happens all the time. I was at a meeting one time in California, and it's a weird, you tell your story and then they ask you questions for 30 minutes. which can be very intimidating. I kind of like it because you just have to be transparent. You have to be spontaneous. You can't plan what you're just, they're hitting you with questions. And in the story, I talked about what a terrible employee I was, and I worked for a blue jean factory, and I used to take blue jeans home. And a guy in the audience said to me, now I'm sober a long time, sober 20-some years. And he said to me, so can you tell us about the amends to the blue jean factory? Oh, I wish I could. But up until this moment, I didn't even realize I never made the amends or I even owed one. And it was embarrassing. But God was clearing a little space off of one of those windows. You can only see what you can see when you can see it. So we're going to break for the day. Thank you all for listening. Tomorrow we're going to talk about the stuff that's, as time goes on, is more and more exciting to me in my life. And that's 6 and 7, 8 and 9, the big turnaround steps. 10 and 11, two of the more misunderstood steps. And 12, which is our primary purpose. It's the big end game here. It's why we do everything else.